Solange Boilard should have been taken to a hospital. Instead, on September 28, 1988, she was laid out inside a remote cult commune and handed over to Roch Thériault. He was not a doctor, but in the closed world he ruled, that hardly mattered. His followers had already been trained not to interfere. They stood there and watched while Thériault began what he called treatment. He sliced open Voilard's abdomen, ripped out part of her intestine with his bare hands, and ordered another follower to stitch the wound closed with a needle and thread. There was no anesthesia, no sterile equipment, and no realistic chance that any of this was going to save her. Solange Boilard died the next day. Years later, Thériault would plead guilty to her murder. But the story of the Anthill Kids did not begin with her death. It began years earlier. The man at the center of it all, in the slow, terrifying way he turned himself into someone his followers would trust, obey, and fear. To understand Roch Thériault, you have to go back to rural Quebec. He was born on May 16, 1947, and raised in Thetford Mines in a poor French-Canadian Catholic family. He was reportedly intelligent, but he left school in the 7th grade and drifted through odd jobs before eventually starting a small woodworking business. Nothing about him yet suggested the scale of horror to come. He was not a preacher, not a doctor, and not a public figure. He was simply a man who had not yet found the role that would let him dominate other people. Religion gave him that opening. Around 1972, after meeting an Adventist pastor, Thériault began teaching himself the Old Testament and grew increasingly obsessed with prophecy, purity, and the idea that the world was nearing a final reckoning. In January 1977, he converted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and adopted a strict lifestyle that rejected alcohol, tobacco, and unhealthy food. To the people around him, that severity could look like discipline. To Thériault, it became something more useful. It gave him the posture of a man who sounded certain. That certainty mattered. He could speak in absolutes, offer simple answers, and tell people that the world was corrupt and running out of time. He presented himself as someone who already knew the way through the chaos. In the late 1970s, that message began drawing followers to him, and faith twisted into power. Once Thériault had people listening, he pushed them further. He gathered followers in Quebec with a message built on discipline, separation, and the coming end of the world. In April 1978, the Seventh-day Adventist Church expelled him, but that only freed him from any outside authority. He no longer needed the church to legitimize him. He was already building his own religious universe. He did not come across as a frothing lunatic. He came across as a man who had rules, scripture, and answers. He persuaded followers to leave their jobs and homes and join him in a community that was supposed to be free of sin. He warned them that God had revealed the world would end in February 1979. That prediction became the center of his authority. He was no longer speaking as another believer. He was speaking as the man who claimed to know exactly how salvation would work. In 1978, as that date approached, Thériault led his followers to a mountainside in the Gaspé Peninsula that he called Eternal Mountain. There he increasingly cast himself as a prophet and called himself Moïse, or Moses. Later accounts say he compared the labor of his followers to ants building an anthill, which is how the group came to be known as the Anthill Kids. When February 1979 arrived and the world stubbornly remained in place, Thériault did not admit he was wrong. He explained the failure away, and the people who already sacrificed so much chose to stay. Life in the commune revolved around obedience. Followers wore identical tunics, worked long hours, and became increasingly cut off from the outside world, while Thériault elevated himself above everyone else. He called himself Moïse, took multiple wives and concubines within the group, and fathered 26 children. By the 1980s, the commune had grown to nearly 40 members. In 1984, the group moved again, this time to Burnt River, Ontario. The geography changed, but the structure did not. To outsiders, it may have looked like a strange but devout backwoods religious settlement. Within the group, one man decided how people worked, how they were punished, who they slept with, and what counted as righteousness. That sort of power does not descend all at once. It accumulates until the people living under it can barely remember what ordinary life looked like before. The longer the group stayed together, the harsher daily life became. People were isolated, exhausted, and dependent on Teriot to define what was holy, what was sinful, and what suffering meant. Faith remained the language of the commune. The fear was what held it together. As the years passed, Teriot extended his control from belief into the body. He began presenting himself as a healer, a man who could diagnose suffering, purge weakness, and fix whatever he decided was wrong. He had no medical training, but in a community where his judgment outranked everyone else's, that hardly slowed him down. By then, the people around him had already learned that whatever he did could be explained away as care. What followed was a pattern of grotesque amateur medicine. Teriot carried out unnecessary procedures on adults and children, including crude circumcisions and injections of 94% ethanol into followers' stomachs, all under the pretense of healing or purification. One of the earliest deadly cases involved a 2-year-old child, Samuel Giguère. After Samuel was injured in 1981, Teriot decided to treat him by cutting into a swelling and injecting alcohol into the child's stomach as an anesthetic. Samuel died the following morning. The details vary across retellings, but the broad pattern is clear. Long before Solange Boilard died, Teriot's so-called healing had already become lethal. Authorities did begin to notice signs of danger around the group. In 1987, social workers removed 17 children from the commune. The adults, however, remained with Teriot. He kept his grip on the people around him, and the violence continued. By the time Solange Boilard died, there had already been other deaths inside Teriot's world. Her murder was simply the one that would become impossible to ignore. In September 1988, Solange Boilard complained of an upset stomach at the Burnt River commune. No one called for a doctor. They brought her to Teriot instead. And by then, the people around him had already learned not to ask what would happen next. What happened to Boilard was the culmination of everything he had been doing for years. Teriot cut open her abdomen, tore out part of her intestine with his bare hands, and had another follower stitch the wound closed with needle and thread. She died the next day from the injuries he inflicted. Her death gave the outside world something undeniable. This was no longer a story about a strange sect in the wilderness or a self-styled prophet playing God. It was murder. After the commune finally began to crack open, Teriot was charged in Boilard's death. In 1993, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a life sentence. The killing of Solange Boilard did not end the violence. Teriot still controlled the commune, and the women around him were still trapped in it. In 1989, one of those women was Gabrielle Lavallee. Contemporary reporting says Teriot cut off her arm after she developed gangrene, and on another occasion, pulled out her teeth and gum tissue. Lavallee's role in this story is not only that she suffered, it is that she survived, escaped, and talked. After she fled and contacted authorities in 1989, police finally had a witness who could describe what had been happening inside the commune. Teriot and 3 followers pleaded guilty to assault charges in the Lavallee case, and Teriot was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Once Lavallee spoke, the whole structure began to collapse. A report opened the door to wider scrutiny of Teriot's abuses and pushed investigators back toward the death of Solange Boilard. The woman he mutilated became the woman who helped destroy the world he had built. Lavallee's escape marked the real end of the Antilliques. In 1989, the assault case dragged the commune out of isolation and into public view. The cult effectively dissolved after Teriot's arrest. His power had always depended on secrecy, intimidation, and distance from the outside world. Once that barrier broke, the movement he had built around himself could not survive. The legal reckoning continued after the assault case. Investigators and the public looked more closely at the history of the commune, and Solange Boilard's death could no longer remain buried inside it. In 1993, Teriot pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in her death, and received a life sentence. The man who had called himself Moses ended up exactly where men like him so often do, stripped of the mystical language, stripped of the isolation that protected him, and left facing the plain record of what he had done. Roque Thériault spent the rest of his life in prison. On February 26, 2011, he was killed at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick after an altercation with a fellow inmate. It was a violent end, but not one that brought much closure. The real damage had already been done years earlier in the lives of the women, men, and children he had controlled. The Anthill Kids case remained one of Canada's darkest cult stories. In 2002, it was dramatized in the film Savage Messiah, another sign that the case had passed out of criminal history and into the country's wider cultural memory. What remains now is not the myth Thériault built around himself, but the record he left behind. A failed prophet, a convicted murderer, a man who wrapped domination in the language of faith and used it to brutalize the people who trusted him most.